In this video, we're exploring how we can brew the tastiest cup of April coffee using the Lili flatbed brewer. Welcome back to another Coffee with April video. This time, we're looking once again at our little experimental brewing focus here, where we're trying to discover new ways to brew April coffee. So ways that we don't necessarily use on a day-to-day basis, but we realize you guys out there are using a lot of different brewing methods, and we want to explore how to make the April coffee the tastiest version on these different brewers. This time, we're having a closer look at a brewer that is called the Lili brewer. It's actually something that I picked up during my trips to Asia last year, where it's a brewer that most people are actually quite familiar, but when you come to Europe, you hardly don't see it. There's a few kind of cool features with this brewer that we should talk about. First of all, it's a really kind of heavy brewer, as in it's really thick ceramic, which is going to be great for heat retention, meaning that the water we pour into this is going to keep temperature really well. Apart from that, we have 48 different tiny channels inside of the brewer, and we have 8 holes in the bottom of the brewer. The general pitch with this is that you want a faster flow rate. So they've been trying to design a flatbed brewer with the fastest flow rate possible, which in our search when it comes to the April brewer, we realize that it's not all about speed. So you don't necessarily want it to always go as fast as possible, right? It's more about flow rate. But we find it really interesting with this brew method. And we're gonna basically brew one of our new coffees using it, which is our Commandante coffee from Kenya, a wash process, SL28, SL34, Bati and Riro mix of varietals. Really juicy, very flavor intense, and berry-like coffee, which works perfect with these kind of flatbed brewers. Now, because we have a really thick ceramic, we're gonna start by preheating or rinsing this filter with quite a lot of water in a high temperature. So the water that we're using to preheat actually sits at 100 degrees Celsius. And we're gonna make sure to properly, again, both rinsing the filter, but also preheating the vessel in itself, so it's gonna be able to retain more temperature throughout the brew. For the brewer itself, we're actually gonna use a larger Kaolin filter, basically. You can use a small one, you can use a big one. I think for this brewer, definitely a larger version will fit better than a small version. Now, because we preheated this vessel, and if you feel it's actually quite warm, with 100 degrees Celsius water, what we're doing is we're gonna take down the brewing temperature down to 88 degrees Celsius. This is gonna allow us to unlock even more of the juicy character in the coffee and give us a better vibrancy. Now, my initial dose here is 16 grams of coffee. I'm going to start by pouring 100 grams of water in my initial pour. Here focusing on making sure that all of those coffee grounds gets evenly saturated. We're going to do a circle pour all the way through. Now I'm going to pour a total of 240 grams of water, which leaves us with a 1:15 brew ratio. This is a concept or ratio of brewing that we see again and again being very successful in different brewing competitions around the world. So we're coming up at 30 seconds. I'm gonna do one more initial pour up to 200 grams. Also here working with a circle. We're trying to make sure that all of that water is poured within 15 seconds. Then we're gonna let that drain, and at 1 minute and 10, we're gonna do our final pour. More about that later. Now, we often talk about days after roast when it comes to brewing coffee here at April, and we still very much recommend that our coffee is roasted for at least 5 to 7 days before starting to brew it. We have some really good results, and here in our new shop, we're also brewing with coffees that are often 2 weeks, 3 weeks old, and we're getting some beautiful results. grind size on this, which is actually kind of interesting because we are using a brewer that is designed to have a faster flow rate. And I will definitely argue that it would be faster than, for example, a Kaolin, which means that in this case, we're actually moved away a bit from our traditional really coarse grind, and we're going a tiny bit finer. Now, moving a bit finer in our world on a Commandante grinder, for example, basically means that we're moving down just below 30 clicks. So in this world, it's going to be about 28, 29, which is still fairly coarse. But that's again because we are looking for a slightly lower TDS in terms of strength. Our target TDS when brewing is almost always between 1.25 and 1.3. Now that being said, and as most of you know that's been watching our videos, we're not huge fans of refractometers, as we believe they're not perfect science or perfect enough science to measure progress. But for those of you that wants the reference, I think that is what we're looking at more or less. Now, when we brew with this coffee, it's kind of interesting, which we end up with quite a few flatbed brewers. Depending on how we pour, you can end up actually clogging up the brewer. That's why we're always finishing with a center pour rather than a circle pour. This, in relationship with keeping a high continuous amount of water in the filter, really helps you to get a slightly better flow rate that is more consistent, more uniform. Now, with this brewer, we're looking at a total brew time of 3 minutes. It's actually not more complicated than that. Overall, pretty much a standard flatbed brewer, heavily inspired by the blue bottle dripper, if you've ever seen that. Basically, the only difference is the amount of holes in the bottom. And we're not completely sure how much of a difference those holes actually make. But for any of you that wants to explore a kind of a new flatbed brewer, then this is a really interesting brewer to play around with. Now, it's been around for years, but again, I haven't seen much of it in Europe. So we're gonna make sure to share all the details about this brewer in terms of where you can find it, in terms of who actually is producing it down here. So if you have any comments or you want to share the experience that you have had with this brewer in the past, we're always really excited to hear your story about it. For now, thank you for watching, and we hope this has been helpful to make you brew better April coffee at home. Thank you.